Well, welcome everyone. It's great to see so many of you here today. We've got a real treat in store. One of our state's most distinguished judiciary and legal leaders, Justice David Viviano, is here with us today. I want to thank the Office of Career Services and Community Outreach for all their efforts in planning today's event, and thanks certainly our guests for joining us. At Wayne Law, we are very fortunate to have such special access to leaders like Justice Viviano and, of course, Supreme Court Justice Marilyn Kelly, retired, is a faculty member here, as well as on our Board of Governors. We have, of course, retired U.S. Senator Carl Levin, and so this is just a continuation of our efforts to bring to you the thoughts and advice and wisdom of our state's greatest legal leaders. Towards the end of the event, there will be some time for questions, and I want to just briefly give you some background on Justice Viviano. He's the 109th Justice of the Michigan Supreme Court. He was appointed by Governor Rick Snyder in 2013, and in 2014 he was elected to complete the remainder of his term. He's a graduate of Hillsdale College and the University of Michigan Law School, but we consider him an honorary warrior here today. He also, prior to becoming a Michigan Supreme Court Justice, Justice Viviano was the Chief Judge of the Macomb County Circuit and Probate Courts, and he's participated in a number of initiatives to improve the administration of justice in our state, and is a strong advocate for technological advancement in the court system. He currently is also serving as the Supreme Court's point person for judicial training and statewide e-filing. And I encourage you to those of you who are thinking about being judges or aspire to being a Supreme Court justice, or are interested, in addition to that, of clerking and clerkships, we'll have a time for Q&A afterwards, after Justice Viviano's remarks. So please do think about questions that would help inform your own career decisions, so that you can perhaps follow in the footsteps of a leader like Justice Viviano. With that, I'll turn it over to our speaker today. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.
I'll be right.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be with you. At the outset, I just want to say I would like for this to be more like a conversation, so please feel free to jump in if you have questions, but also at the end, I'm going to give a little bit of a presentation, and at the end, I'll leave some time for questions. Also, I see this great lunch that's the law school, I think, has provided for you, so I also will not be offended if you decide to get up and get some more food, and some very casual, informal time. So, Dean Benson mentioned I'm a Michigan law grad, but I do feel a strong connection to the law school here. Among other things, my sister Kathy, who is the business court judge in Macomb County, is a Wayne Law and Business School graduate. She got her master's in business here as well. I also took a course here one time I was in law school. I was a summer starter at Michigan, and I needed to take one additional summer course to graduate with my summer starting class in December of 1996, which kind of seems like a long time ago now. I'm starting to get to that point in my career where I look back and think law school was a long time ago. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm so glad that Dean Benson invited me to be with you today, because it's really refreshing to be with people who are starting out on the journey that I started out on a long time ago. And to hear from you what, I know you want to hear from me what my thoughts are, but I really want to hear from you about what law students today, what your challenges are, and what you're hoping to accomplish by becoming lawyers in the current, what I think is a very exciting environment. Dean Benson mentioned also, of course, that the law school has a connection with the Supreme Court through former Justice Kelly, who teaches here now, but also through current Justice Richard Bernstein, who served on your Board of Governors for 8 years before he came to join us on the Supreme Court. One note, I guess, I'm going to talk later about getting involved in government service and politics, or even nonprofit, community service at a young age. I've done that. I know Dean Benson has done that as well. But Richard Bernstein has now replaced me as the youngest person on the Michigan Supreme Court, so I can no longer lay claim to that. I guess I would lastly note, as I told some of you in the room next door where we were chatting for a couple minutes, my office is right down the street in Cadillac Place. I think it's literally 4 blocks away from here. And I oftentimes find myself driving down Cass to go to lunch or to go to meetings or other presentations. And it's just a very exciting time. I'm excited for all of you to see what's going on with the revitalization of Detroit. Also seems to me a renaissance here right at the university in terms of how active and energized the student body is throughout the university. So I think it's just an exciting time to be here. We were talking a little bit next door about how folks can't find places to live down here. So Dean Benson, I think we need a law school dormitory to get folks down here. But it's you know, those are the problems that come when you have this kind of a resurgence in the city. But those are good problems to have, and it's really an exciting time. I think, again, as I mentioned a moment ago, it's a great time to be in and soon to be graduating from law school. Of just a few years ago, 2009, the legal market, the economy as a whole was not good. And frankly, things were not happening in the city of Detroit. You know, you don't have that long of a memory to remember what things were like here before the bankruptcy and before Mayor Duggan and Mayor Bing, obviously to a degree, but started to get this city back on the right path. And for all of you, not only is it exciting to be here for your law school education, but to think about the opportunities that are going to be present for you when you graduate, if you decide to stay local in the city, certainly in the region, but if you decide to participate in what's happening in this great city. I wanted to talk today just a little bit about my background and sort of my career path, and then talk to you about your career choices and the opportunities that will be out there for you. As you can already sort of tell, the emphasis will be on lawyers as public and community servants. I'm from Macomb County, so this is the county to the north and east of here. I know a number of you are as well. I still live with my wife in Sterling Heights. I spend about 5 or 6 days a month in Lansing when the court's in session or when we have conference. All of our meetings are in person. Otherwise, though, I spend my time at the office here in Cadillac Place because it's closer for me and allows me to be more productive and still closer to my family. In and before law school, I did a number of internships, and we were talking next door also about how the challenge that all of you face of understanding sort of what's around the bend for you in terms of a legal career. What's the actual work going to be like in all of the many things that you're considering doing. The great thing about a law degree is that you can do 10,000 different things with it. There's not only 1 or 2 or 3 different things. The hard thing is knowing now what kind of classes you should be taking to prepare yourself when you don't really know necessarily what you want to do. And one of the things I did as a young person is got involved in as many internships as I could. Even in undergrad, I interned for a criminal defense attorney, and I interned for the Macomb prosecutor's office for a summer. I did internships on Capitol Hill. I was fortunate to intern in law school for Judge Zadkoff at the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Michigan. He just unfortunately passed away in this last year, but that was a great experience for me. And then, of course, I interned at Dickinson Wright for the summer before, as a summer associate, the summer before I started my full-time employment there. And so there was a myriad of different experiences in politics and in the court and in the prosecutor's office and on the criminal defense side that I think gave me a decent idea of at least what happens in all those various locales. And I would encourage you, I'm sure you're all trying to do that, but I think that's the best thing you can do. Most of those were unpaid. I think only one of them I can think of was a paid position. So even in those days, we weren't getting paid for internships. I know that's a rarity these days. And I would mention, again, as Dean Benson said, I'm certainly open for internships as well. And as I mentioned, my office is really only a couple blocks away. And so if you're interested, and you probably can do it, there's a way to do it for credit through the law school, but we're happy to have you come, some of you at least, those that we can accommodate, to do internships. And as far as the hiring of full-time law clerks, we are sort of on the federal hiring calendar. So when you're applying for federal clerkships, those of you who are interested in doing that, we'd be happy to receive your applications in that time frame as well. So that means I just hired a couple months ago somebody who will not be starting until August of next year. So that has to be done pretty far in advance for us to remain competitive with the federal judges who are obviously very organized in their hiring. I started my legal career just down the road from here as well. I used to be One Detroit Center working for Dickinson Wright. I was an employment and commercial litigator there. We did a lot of work for the city of Detroit at that time. Mayor Archer had left the firm to run for mayor, and so we did a lot of employment work for the city. And actually, that time in my life, I moved from Macomb County into the city of Detroit. I lived in East English Village, so it's sort of why I'm excited for you all. At that time, I was really hoping that was going to be the time when Detroit started to get back on the right path. It went a little slower than I thought, but it seems to be happening now. I spent a couple years working at Dickinson Wright, and then I decided to move on to Chicago, to a larger national firm, litigation firm called Jenner & Block, and I got great experience there. I kind of spread out into some different areas. The firm was really litigation focused, but it handled major cases all over the country and really represented clients all over the world. And that was pretty exciting to be working on major patent litigation on behalf of a Japanese company, a case that was filed in California, for example, and sort of fly out to Palo Alto and do depositions and see how these things work. We worked on securities class action cases. We did a lot of trade secret litigation. One thing about both firms I worked at, but in particular Jenner & Block, I think does the most pro bono hours, the lawyers there, of any firm in the entire country, and that was a big part of the firm's reputation and ethics, and so I had the ability to do that as well. And in fact, I represented a criminal defendant on a pretty serious, it was an aggravated kidnapping charge in the Cook County Circuit Court toward the end of my tenure at Jenner & Block. After that, I decided to move back home to Macomb County. I started my own law firm, which is still in existence today. I went through my sister working there, and then my brother Joe. It's his firm. He has his two partners. But I pretty quickly decided that I wanted to get involved in public service, and so I ran in 2004 to be the Macomb County prosecutor, and won the primary, but lost in the general election to the current prosecutor, Eric Smith. I will tell you, when I was thinking of what the challenges you all are facing and how hard it is to send in applications and get rejection letters and things that happen to all of us, it's important to remember that all of us have gone through that. And for me, I have the rejection letters too, but I also, in a very public way, put myself out there to be prosecutor in a major county in a major campaign, and things didn't quite go the way I had planned, and it was tough to take. But in life, you learn to pick yourself up and dust yourself off. And for me, another opportunity arose to run for judge in 2006, and I decided to do that. And fortunately, the results were a little bit more favorable. And so I started my judicial career. At the time, my father was on the bench as well, and so we had the great honor and sort of unique life experience of working together as colleagues on the same circuit bench in Macomb County. I became the chief judge of the circuit court after into my 6th year on the bench, and really was enjoying and I like to think thriving in all the challenges and excitement of trying to be an administrative reformer within the court system. Courts are not used to being sort of actively managed, but I tell people I have to be a little bit careful, but really the reality is judges are first of all, a lot of judges aren't interested in administration, and the ones who are typically aren't very good at it. We're not trained in administration, right? We didn't go to business school. We didn't, especially in counties like Macomb, didn't work in large organizations. And so all of a sudden you're in charge of a court with 350 employees and a significant budget, and you have to decide, am I going to really actively manage this organization, or sort of sit back and let the staff manage it and just sort of put out fires when they arise. And I was much more active and ambitious in trying to implement reforms. Among the things that we worked on in Macomb County was a major building project, because the court facilities were badly in need of renovation. The overall space planning hadn't occurred in many, many years, so a lot of our buildings were half occupied, for example. And so, working with the county board and the county executive, we started this initiative. Now they have the funding, and now they've undertaken a major, I think it's about a $50 million renovation, not just of the court structures, but all the county facilities in Macomb. So that's something I'm still pretty excited about, although obviously not directly involved in that. In terms of, we talked next door a little bit about becoming a judge, and just to give you a sense of what my journey has been like on the political side, My father ran for probate judge in 1992 and contested primary and contested general. Fortunately, he won. He decided in 2002 he wanted to run for the circuit court. And so again, he ran in a contested race, which our whole family was involved in. And fortunately, he prevailed. I just mentioned 2004 for myself for prosecutor. I ran for judge in 2006, again, contested primary and general. We took 2008 off. 2010, my sister Kathy, my dad was retiring, she decided to run, so she had a contested general election. 2012 was my re-elect year. We finally had a breather. No one ran against me or any one of the judges on our bench, and so that was kind of a nice thing. But about 2 weeks later, the governor called and offered me this new position, which, as I explained to my wife, meant that I would be running in 2014 and 2016, now statewide. And so I can tell you that you know, these jobs, folks think they're glamorous, and it's a great honor to be where I'm at, but there's a lot of work that's invested in if you want to get involved in public service, either yourself or helping others. And it's been, for us, really a hugely rewarding thing, because you meet so many people that care about our community and now that care about our state and that are interested in helping to elect good people in public office, and we need more and more of them. So I'd encourage you all to think about opportunities to get involved. You know, we have a lot of critics in this country and in this state, but don't be a critic unless you're willing to propose a solution, and also to perhaps get out there yourself and implement the solution, or at least to find others that you're willing to support to do that. It's so important to get involved in our political process. All right, so in terms of lawyers, I love history, and talking about the things, I always think about what lawyers have done for our country. And really, even before that, from the time that law has ordered civil society, we've needed lawyers to help citizens interpret the law and understand their legal obligations. Of course, the people who founded our country, Adams and Jefferson and Hamilton, most of the people who signed or went to the Constitutional Convention were lawyers. Obviously had a dramatic impact on our country, and I'm a huge fan of Lincoln. You all are probably too. But probably our greatest president. What's so interesting to me, and I used to read a lot about Lincoln when I was in law school, is that he used his legal skills to end slavery, and he used his legal skills to save the Union. He was a brilliant communicator, no doubt. Skills he learned as a litigator in court, the speeches that he gave, in those days we didn't have speech writers and we didn't have teleprompters. He wrote these speeches, and you can see the drafts where he's changing and thinking through the different words he wants to use at Gettysburg, and his second inaugural address. And I can't help but thinking, as a lawyer, that these are the skills that he used or gained as a lawyer, was able to use to lead our country through such a difficult time. I'm also, I think it's so interesting that he couldn't find a military general to lead the country. General Lee went with the South. He was the best military general. He was the best general that there was. And so Lincoln had to go and learn the art of war. He had to go to the Library of Congress and check out books on military strategy, and he had to teach himself to be a better general at that time than his general, so he could make personnel decisions that no one else could help him with, in terms of when it was time to replace people and try to get the right people to lead the Union Army. So I think I'm focused on that because they just replayed Ken Burns' documentary, and I made my wife sit there and watch most of it with me, night after night after night, until it was over. Then we went back to reality TV. So. That's my version of reality TV. All right, I'm not that boring. But. So I do think lawyers have an obligation to give back to the community. I talked to you a little bit about pro bono work. Whether you work for a big firm, a big company, whether you work for a community organization or work for the government, I think it's so important to think of yourself as a lawyer as a public servant. You don't have to just to get elected to office to do public service. It could mean representing indigent clients in criminal or civil cases, or working for the government, either as a prosecutor's office or in the law department. A lot of good work can be done representing people on the defense side, criminal defense side. Not just trying to help people get out of a jam, but helping them to learn better behaviors and to stop their antisocial behavior and help people get back on the right track. Your dean, I know, has done a lot of work helping people who wouldn't otherwise be able to afford representation. I think that's extremely important work. Some of my law school classmates they decided they weren't gonna do any of this big firm and big company work, and they went out and started Think Detroit, which is now part of the Police Athletic League here in Detroit, and over the last 15 to 20 years helped lots and lots of kids in this city. So you should be thinking, regardless of your career path, you should be thinking of yourself now as a lawyer, as having an obligation to find a way to help others. I mentioned before, I lived in Detroit, and I was so excited when I moved here and hope to be part of the sort of resurgence of Detroit. You all now have that opportunity, and so one of the most powerful messages I have is make sure that you don't let it pass. Take advantage of the opportunity to be a part of what's going on right here in the city of Detroit, in the state of Michigan, where your law school is. I think it's critical in Detroit that the lawyers who are trained here become leaders. We have two law schools here, and there are a lot of folks from those law schools who have gone on to be in leadership positions. Just by being here, you give the city credibility, but you also are really a fountain of talented, energetic people who have a lot to offer. So I would say, just in closing, lawyers are careful and conscientious people by nature. We're all about minimizing risk, and that's an important thing to help your clients with. But when it comes to your career path, you should think out of the box. You should go outside of your comfort zone. I've spent most of my life outside of mine. It takes a lot of hard work and determination to get your first job. As I mentioned already, there of course will be disappointments along the way. In the end, I'm confident that each and every one of you will find your path and will make an important contribution in whatever way that you decide to do so, and then also that you'll find a way to help others. So with that, I'm happy to answer questions. That's it, no questions? We had a lot more next door. Yes?
I was curious about the reforms you were implementing at the circuit level.
Okay.
Are you also considering implementing reforms as a body of justices at the Supreme Court level? And if so, what are you considering?
Yeah, it's a great question. When I went through the appointment process, it was really interesting for me. That all came up very fast. It was a big surprise. But I was able to sit with the governor and tick off 10 different things I was working on, technology-wise, trying to work toward e-filing. We have some of that in Macomb. We really desperately need statewide e-filing to have a federal system. You all may not be familiar with that but you will be very soon. The federal courts across the entire country have a very seamless e-filing system that also allows public access to documents for very, very inexpensively. The system functions well. Michigan we're a locally funded state, so our courts are all funded by local funding rates. It becomes very difficult to come up even with statewide solutions. And so when you're in terms of, I can tick off a number of initiatives, things like performance measures. The Supreme Court has been much more actively managing the state court system, and then part of that is doing what I mentioned before, which is looking for chief judges, chief administrators who are going to fit that model, who understand that we're not there. We don't want people who want to be there, for the title and the prestige. We want people who want to actually get there and do things. I used to say that on the campaign trail. There's two types of people, judges and really public office across the board, in my opinion. The people who accomplished everything they wanted to accomplish the day they got elected or appointed, and the people who got elected or appointed because they wanted to accomplish things. And so that's we want to reform the system. We've implemented performance measures. Again, the Supreme Court led this before I got there. People like Justice Kelly, Justice Kavanaugh, and Justice Young, and they pushed that down into all of our courts to do some basic benchmarking of performance. It's kind of an interesting thing if you think about it. You work for a corporation, pretty easy to tell if you're doing well. Is the company making money? Is it returning value to the shareholders? Is it paying a dividend? When you get in government, it becomes much more difficult to measure your performance. Because we, of course, don't have a bottom line. We're a necessary service. So So how do we tell if we're doing a good job? And how do we measure performance from employee to employee or from judge to judge? And so you have to, the National Center for State Courts, probably about a decade ago, maybe a little bit more, started pushing out performance measures as a way to do this. And Michigan, I think, has been a leader in performance measures. So now we measure and track caseload. And how is a judge doing managing his or her docket? Those statistics used to be kept internally. Now they're public statistics. They're published on the website, so the public has the right to know this, right? It was controversial. No one, if you're a judge and someone's going to be average and someone's going to be above and below, but no one wants to have their opponent run against them for election saying the judge is below average on their handling their cases. But as soon as you start putting this information out there, guess what happens? All of a sudden, everybody's docket gets a little bit better, in a little bit better shape. The low performers start paying more attention. Some other interesting things happen. Courts are, as much as everything else in government, we're near the worst of this, they're silos. When you become a judge, you no longer have the opportunity to go from courtroom to courtroom and see how everyone else is doing business like you did when you were a lawyer. You're in your courtroom every day. You're doing things your way. And so you don't really have the ability to see who may be doing things more effectively. But we started measuring things like who's collecting more of their fines and costs. And you start reporting this, and then you see that there's a big disparity. Some judges are actually getting some money that they're supposed to, other judges are not really getting any. And so the question is why? What practices are the successful judges using? And can we use those and spread them out across the state? So there's been a lot of that, a lot of collaboration, but you first need these statistics to identify these disparities. If you don't have the statistics, everybody just goes along. One thing, if you ever are fortunate enough to become a judge, you'll learn is that the lawyers all laugh at your jokes and they all tell you how smart you are. And it's very hard to get good feedback on whether you're actually doing something right or wrong. And so these statistics are, I used to think when I was a trial judge that the only real feedback, objective feedback I ever got was when somebody appealed me and the Court of Appeals issued an opinion. And you could read at least 3 other judges say what they thought about what you did. And so I think that the performance measures gives judges a way to benchmark your performance against yourself, against others in your building, against others across the state. And so that's an important reform that's really become part of the culture. The last couple of years it was controversial, but now it's sort of part of the culture at our trial courts. It's been a really important shift in the way we're thinking. So that, technology, consolidation, we're sort of right-sizing the judiciary. We're instead of having the same positions we had 50 years ago with all the different population shifts, we're looking at caseload and population and judicial need and saying, okay, where do we need less? And frankly, where do we need more? In Macomb County, we need more judges. So it's not just a one-way ratchet where we're ratcheting down. And so the transition for me was an interesting one because I administratively felt that I had launched 1,000 shifts. We were working on. I could bore you guys all day with different things we were working on. And then I left, and I told the governor I felt like I launched 1,000 shifts, and I'm never going to get to see where they land. This building project was something that when my first before I took over as chief judge, Jocelyn knows I'm pretty good friends with the county executive. I had him come in and we walked buildings, and I said, look, this just can't be. This is there's parts of our building that, believe it or not, there was half of the first floor of the Macomb County Court building. The court administration had no control over. People from different departments had sort of claimed old offices and put on different locks, and it was like the Wild West. And I was, why? This cannot be. This is, all kinds of liability, all kinds of things happen. And so, but the county exec picked up on it, and he took my little idea and brought it out to the whole county. They did a space assessment for the entire county. And I don't have the ability. I've never done municipal finance. I don't know how you pay for these things. So, his people took it over and worked with the bond lawyers, and they put together the whole proposal, and our board was on board. So it's pretty exciting. Now, the problem is I left, so I'm not there. I'm not part of this anymore. But so when you go to the state level, the key is, and I talked to the governor about it, is okay. I want to bring these things I learned in the trenches, and try to figure out things we can do statewide. So it does translate. I will tell you though that just like in the trial courts, the chief justice of our court has the administrative responsibility. He has to get a majority majority of us to agree to do anything, most major things, or that's all major things. But so, and in that sense, you sort of start over, I was the low man, now Richard's the low man, so it starts over. But I'm kind of working my way into the position to hopefully be a little more influential. E-filing is a big thing. I'd really like to find a solution. We're working with the legislature right now to get the funding we need to come up with a statewide e-filing program, to start a fund. That has to come from the legislature. So, sorry, long answer.
No, are performance measures common in other states? Is Michigan kind of like a leading?
I think we're a leader, but there's some. If you go to the National Center for State Courts website, they do research and they keep up with what other states are doing. I can't give you the statistics, but I think we're doing it as much as anybody, and more than a lot. You can gauge yourself, and I think it's important to do so with what other states are doing. E-filing is another one. Court technology. How are we using the technology? Some states have figured out an e-filing solution. We haven't, so I would say we're behind the curve in that regard. But it's the same thing. You're onto something that's really important. It's not just from county to county or court to court within the court building. It's also what are people doing in other states. And really, it's kind of interesting. I have some oversight over judicial training, and I just told our people there's actually international groups that talk about judicial training, and there's some common themes. And so I think we just signed on to start getting the international group's newsletter to see, what thought processes are out there around the world that people are using to train judges, and have we thought of these things? And if not, do we think they would help, help us in Michigan to train our judges? A lot of this has to do with training. You get the statistics, you get the information, and then you got to train people to use it. All the due protocol. So we're doing some good things. You can pay speeding tickets. I shouldn't admit this, but as I just did on the internet. There's different things you can do now that you couldn't do before. That you're going to be able to contest speeding tickets on the internet. Shouldn't be have to take a day off work to go and even to contest a ticket. There's a website at the court. They revamped the whole thing, and it's really a great website. Now, I'm not here to pedal for the website, but there's tons of information. I go on it almost every day to do my job. I get through what rules are there, all kinds of stuff. But it's I think it gets about 1 million hits a month. So courts.mi.gov, if you want to see what we're doing, the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeals, link to the trial courts throughout the state. Our oral arguments are live streamed. There's summaries of the cases if people want to read them and see what they're about before you watch the oral arguments. And so it's pretty interesting what you're able to see if you want to see. Who else? Yes, sir.
How would you say your time at Macomb County shaped your time now in the Supreme Court, particularly when deciding cases like Lockridge, where it affects the trial court process?
Yeah, it's a big impact. It's interesting because I went right from the trial court to the Supreme Court. So I sort of rocketed into town. My colleagues, I'm not the only one though that served on a trial bench. Even Mike Kavanaugh, many years ago, was a district judge for a brief time. But Mary Beth Kelly and Brian Zara were here in the Wayne Circuit Court. So I'm not the only one with trial court experience. But it was the freshest for me, and they sort of give me a hard time because I'm always kind of looking out for, how's this going to affect the trial courts? I know all the trial court judges, not all of them, but I know a lot of them around the state because we've gone to conferences and because I presented New Judges School on jury administration. And so, these are the people you kind of grew up with. And something came up recently. Let's see. There's this question of citing Court of Appeals, unpublished Court of Appeals opinions. I don't know if you've looked at that. It's been a very contentious issue. The Court of Appeals wants there to be less of that. The lawyers want there to be more of that, and so they're butting heads. And we had a public hearing on the rule, and so I asked my question, which just occurred to me there, although my colleagues accused me of pandering to the trial court judges. I just asked them, have we thought about this rule? This rule is cited all the time to say that these cases are not precedentially binding. If we change the rule to say that citing unpublished opinions is disfavored, even though it's an appellate rule, what impact do we think this will have on the citing of unpublished opinions in the trial courts, where, the Court of Appeals does 18,000 cases a year. I mean, the state of of different factual scenarios that go through the trial courts that never make it to the Court of Appeals. And these unpublished opinions can be useful, because then sometimes you'll find one that factually is very similar, even though the point of law is decided in a published case, but factually it's very similar. And this is the work that lawyers like to do, and frankly, as a trial judge, I didn't mind knowing what 3 members of the Court of Appeals said, even if it wasn't binding. I mean, I'd have to follow them. If I thought strongly they were wrong, I wouldn't, but, all other things equal, if their reasoning is sound, it's sort of a sensible system of justice to have, consistent outcomes. So, so I think that, I look at things, I try to look at things from that perspective. At the same time, I don't think I have the same perspective that my colleagues have when they look at Court of Appeals opinions. They sometimes know the personalities more than me. I just sort of look at them on the surface and say, is this case getting the right outcome or not? So but it definitely impacts you. It really comes into play on these rule changes, more so in the cases, although occasionally there'll be a discussion on the cases, but, obviously Lockridge is going to have a big impact. But, at the end of the day of this job, you have to follow the law wherever it takes you. I don't feel that I have discretion when it comes to legal decisions like you do administratively. Yes?
You'd mentioned criminal defense as an opportunity for public service. I moved here from Florida. I'm a homeowner now here on the east side of Detroit. And one of the things I noticed right away moving here is that the state of Michigan doesn't have an established branch or department specifically set aside for criminal defense. Whereas where I came from in Florida, you had a state attorney's office and a state defender's office. And Michigan is routinely ranked very, very low quarterly in terms of adequate criminal representation for criminal defendants. Do you see the Supreme Court as having an obligation or responsibility to be a reformer in that respect as well?
Well, it's interesting. You say, do we have, I'm sure we do, but we don't have a budget. The legislature provides the budget. So it's even like e-filing. We can't tell local courts what technology to use, much less what they have to do in terms of setting up a public defender's office. Now, do I think, if you're asking me, do I think that we should have a public defender system? I think one that's run well is a very efficient and fair way to deal with a lot of the issues that you're pointing out. I think that representation is uneven, no question about it. Some people who represent indigent defense people do a fine job, but a lot of times they don't. Now, I have to tell you, I find, as a trial judge, I found representation uneven, even for people who are getting paid. So it's not just a function of money all the time. In fact, the one time I reversed a murder conviction for ineffective assistance of counsel, it was retained counsel, not appointed counsel. And so, but, the governor has shown some leadership. They've started a commission that has gone out, I think, and tried to evaluate exactly how uneven the quality of representation is from county to county around our state. The problem is, until there's an appetite to pay for it, it's hard to see politically where that's going to happen. People, voters, the large mass of voters, aren't really excited about investing a lot of resources in the current environment to represent. Most people don't think criminal defendants should have a lawyer in the first place. If you've ever been around when a heinous crime is committed, people really didn't even understand why we're wasting time going through the whole address. I saw that happen in Macomb County, where my father was the chief judge in the Stephen Grant case, and he decided that Stephen Grant needed a good lawyer. And so he went out and appointed one of the best in the county to represent him, and there was a storm of criticism. Why are we making sure this heinous criminal defendant has, this has been from the prosecutor, even the sheriff to a degree, that people were, and my dad, of course, been around the block a few times. He actually understands how the criminal justice system is supposed to work. He was a prosecutor for almost a decade. He was a criminal defense attorney for almost 2 decades. So he has a pretty good sense of how this is supposed to work. So for him, he was, kind of interesting. I'll tell you a little more about my dad. This case was on the front page of the paper every day. It was a leading story of all the local news stations. It was on the front page of all the papers. News, Free Press, and Macomb kind of knew how to make the Detroit paper, at least on the front page. And so he appointed this lawyer, and the story broke, and there's this controversy. I said, Dad, the way he kind of let it out, he probably could have done a better job when he released the news. And I said, aren't you aware of how this story is being followed? I said, it's been on the news every night, so why don't I watch the local news? He said, well, it's been in all the papers, so why don't I read the papers either? So what they do is, and that's sort of the judge you want, he's uninfluenced by any of that nonsense that's going on. So, of course, Stephen Graham was convicted, and his conviction stood on appeal, so that's the whole point, right? He's going to be convicted, you don't want it to be reversed for ineffective assistance of counsel. So,
Can I just quickly follow up?
please.
I know you said you're pursuing these other reforms of performance measures. Do you find that the political environment of being an elected judge affects your ability to pursue certain kinds of reforms like performance measures, but doesn't affect, or maybe negatively affects pursuing reforms like improved criminal defense opportunities or things that are more controversial?
I don't think so. I mean, I think we have a leadership role. I don't mean to dodge the question. I think we have a role in speaking out. You know, this is, when I was in Macomb County, you know, among the 1,000 shifts, I just started looking at this exact issue, whether we should move at the county level to a public defender system. You know, obviously, not only in Florida, but the federal system has a federal defender office where they're paid the same rate as a prosecutor. That strikes me as a fair system. But you need resources to get there. So, I mean, I can speak out all I want. You also have to be a little bit sensitive to this is the system that we have, you know. So as a judge, as a trial judge, I did feel an obligation, obviously, to make sure a defendant was getting a fair trial, even if it meant that at times, if I thought the prosecutor was taking advantage of a defense attorney who didn't know what he or she necessarily was doing, at least as to a particular point of law or evidentiary issue, that I would interject at times. I would call people up on the sidebar. I would, you know, I'm not going to get too much detail, but I can remember asking the prosecutor, you know, after he asked an obviously inappropriate and probably unethical question to a police detective about the defendant's criminal history, and the defense counsel didn't object. I said, you know, do you count it as a win if you get a guilty verdict, but it's reversed on appeal? You know, what are we doing? And I looked at the defense counsel. I said, what is your problem? Are you alive? Do you have a pulse? You know, so I mean, I think, and I'll tell you, I take some pride in you know, 7 or so years that I was a trial judge. I don't think, other than the one that I reversed, I don't think any of my trials were reversed for error. But you couldn't just sit back. I mean, if you wanted that to be the case, you couldn't just let it happen on the criminal side. So it's, I mean, we certainly have work to do. And I think, I mean, it's like everything else. Part of it can be fixed, I think, with better training and monitoring and watching the lists, you know, and if people aren't doing their job, getting them off the list. Macomb has an A, B, and C list, so we differentiate by level of experience. The judges don't appoint from the bench. You know, it's done through judicial aid, so you take it away from the individual judges, so you don't have that issue going on. So there are things we can do within our imperfect system to make it better. Do I agree with you that optimally we would have a statewide public defender's office? I probably would agree with that. I just don't know where we find the money for that in our budget. You know, I mean, and I don't know how you're going to get a majority of the legislature to agree with that. So part of life is understanding what the political realities are and living with them. People ask me, you know, what about this system where you have to run for office and shouldn't we be appointed judges for, you know, life tenure? And I say, yeah, that'd be great. I mean, it's a great thing. What do you want me to say? I think to run all these little pictures I just told you about. But do you really think the electorate is chomping at the bit to get public officials appointed who can stay there forever? Is that the mood of the electorate now, or at any time in the foreseeable future? So you have to work within. It's part of you know, the great thing and the frustrating thing about democracy, right? You have to work within the art. You know, politics is the art of what's possible. Right? So doesn't mean we don't have an obligation to make it better, but you know, you're tilting at windmills. Why not? You know. So I'm not saying you are. I mean, I'd like to see movement on that. I'm interested to see this commission and see what impact it has. And part of what you see is, I thought things were uneven in my court, but you know, the reporting that's been done so far has said that outstate things are a lot worse than they are in Macomb County. You know, so you're your problems are relative as well. Who else? Yes?
What was the best class you took in law school?
I took a lot of good ones. I had Yale Canvassar for criminal procedure. He was pretty entertaining. He's sort of the father of Miranda. Did a lot of the work that led to that. I know your, let's see, father-in-law was on the other side of that issue. But he was very animated. I had Professor White for Uniform Commercial Code, Secured Transactions. He wrote Article 9 of the code and was very interested, just a fascinating guy. He was in the military, and we had the class 8 a.m., 4 days a week. It moved fast. So I know I had a lot of great professors at Michigan. Trying to think of any of them. I really enjoyed the substantive aspect of being there. It was all very theoretical. And in a way, everybody always says this, but you weren't being trained on Michigan law, and you certainly weren't being trained on the Michigan bar exam. But you have sort of developed the ability to look at law more broadly, look at tort law and contract law and see what the work that people do on the restatement and other things to really talk about sort of the body of law. And it's interesting because where I am now has been, not as much now, but has been sort of this controversial flashpoint on the development of tort law, these different issues in Michigan. And I don't think any of that is addressed at Michigan. They would look at it much more broadly, which I think is a good thing. I think you have to develop the ability always in what you're doing to have perspective. And so you sort of have to take yourself out of the, what's confronting you right in front of you, and always sort of back up and look at the broader picture. And I think that's kind of the approach that I learned there. Who else? Come on, what about jobs? Careers, I thought this was. I know we had just a couple.
I'll ask it, prior to becoming a judge or justice, what aspect of your career most helped prepare you for playing the role of a judge or justice?
I think being in court, obviously, handling some trials, even the trial here in Cook County, was a great experience. As a lawyer, I think your communication skills are so important. I tell my clerks, I'm sure you've heard this, loose lips sink ships. You learn to communicate very clearly and directly and say only as much as you mean to say. So becoming very detail oriented. When I went to Jenner and Block, they had really just tremendous lawyers from went to Harvard, to all the best law schools, and had all the best clerkships, including Supreme Court clerkships, and so this was all sort of above my pay grade. But working with these people, all of a sudden, I would send in my draft of a brief that we were going to file, and it was a little crazy, a little nutty. If the staple wasn't at the right angle, it would come back to me in my inbox, fix this. But literally on page 23, it would come back to me and saying, you left 2 spaces in between words, and you would get it back, and you'd have to fix that before you could submit that up the chain. So you learn to really be detail oriented and really slow down. It's hard to do. It's hard to read things multiple times. It's hard to read for content and then try to read for grammar and sentence structure. All these things, at least I have to do it, because some people can do it all at once, but I have to read it a couple times to look at it from different vantage points. And so, to get on the bench, I was detail oriented. I learned when I needed to slow things down. So if I got in a trial in an area where I was like, the red flags were going off, I knew enough to know that we're going to take a break here, and I'm going to go. And I also was well trained enough that I didn't have to necessarily call a law clerk in Macomb. We didn't have attorney law clerks. I didn't have to call the research library. I went and tipped the book off the shelf myself, or got on Westlaw and looked it up. And so, if you're well trained and you're well prepared, you'll do great as a lawyer and you'll do great as a judge. There is nothing that trains you, as we talked about again next door, there's nothing that trains you sort of to make that next half step. It's a completely different perspective to be on the bench. It's this great, you have this great luxury And no longer are you stuck with your client's facts, right? So you as a judge, you get to pick whoever has the best factual argument, whoever has the best legal argument. I think in becoming a judge, there are some really important things. One is to remain humble, treat people with respect. Having said that, I was a young judge, and so some lawyers would be very aggressive and get in your space, believe it or not, in the courtroom, be real aggressive and tell you how you have to rule, and tell you what to do. So I think you have to be strong enough to say, hey, back off. This is my domain. And the way that I did that was by knowing a lot more, usually, about the law than anyone who appeared before me. And so you'll find a lot of lawyers, especially the ones who are bullies, are usually not very well prepared. And so, that worked well for me. And it's, and you will all find that in your legal careers as a young lawyer, that, you're going to be treated a certain way as a new person, and everybody goes through this. You'll be offended by how the lawyer treated you in like a deposition or acting like you don't know what you're doing. It's just part of the process. So, you gotta, it gets into advocacy. You as a lawyer, you go to all these courts and you think, which judge had the demeanor that I liked, which one had the style that I liked, and which one had the substance that I liked. Judge Duggan, who's retiring tomorrow from the federal bench, I remember representing the city of Detroit in a case, motion for summary disposition, and I written the brief. I was probably a second year lawyer. And Judge Duggan saying to the plaintiff's lawyer, since the question was, is there an issue of fact in this, I think it was a 1983 case. And the lawyer said, of course, Judge, this. Judge Duggan said, tell me what page of the deposition and what line. The lawyer couldn't have nothing to say. He'd say, well, if you're gonna cite a fact, tie it to the record. What page and what line? And when he was done with this lawyer, there was no case, motion was granted, summary disposition. And I learned from that. The lawyer's throwing up a big smoke screen, but your job is to, what are the facts that are in this case, in this record, so that I can look at those and see if I agree with you or not. I learned as a judge pretty early on to figure out the toughest question in my preparation for each side of the case. And it's a great way of deciding cases, because you'd have lawyers who dance all over the place, who weren't prepared, who hadn't thought of this, or if they had thought of it, they didn't know what to say, so they just stopped thinking about it. And so you ask them a question, and they change the subject. And I was respectful. I would let lawyers go on for a minute or two, and then I would repeat the question, and then they would dance off in a different direction. And I would be patient, and I would let them do their thing. And then the third time, I would ask the same question, and if they didn't answer it, I would figure there's no answer, and therefore you should lose the mission. Clearly, you can't overcome it, On the other hand, good advocates have thought about that, and might actually, that's why oral argument is important, even at the Supreme Court. If you have the objectivity of the perspective to think about your case, not just about what is your best argument, your strongest argument, but to think about what's the weakness in your argument, you might actually have an answer to that question that judges haven't thought of. And so you might actually move the needle in oral argument. Anybody else? All right, you guys, good luck with school. Work hard.
Thank you.